Hi, I'm PInkston, and today I'm going to be talking about a cross-court volleyball swing. So when we are looking at a cross-court volleyball swing, volleyball players use torque, which is created when the hips are closing the door. This means when the athlete is going from being open to the center and turning their body or trunk towards the net, and in their shoulder when their arm comes from behind the head and ends up next to or in front of their head in order to contact the ball. This means that there is shoulder internal rotation torque and elbow varus torque. We also see angular force being created when the arm is extended and swings through the ball, compressing it toward its desired destination while following through. Some factors that affect torque are, for a volleyball swing, would be an athlete's lack of core strength. So having a weak core means that the athlete will be less likely to be able to move their hips, leaving them unable to rotate their trunk and shoulders towards the net in order to follow through. The second factor that would affect torque in a volleyball swing would be the speed in which a player can move their arm from behind their head to in front of their head. This slow motion really takes a toll on volleyball players when they're trying to create that torque that they need to be successful. And the last one that I can think of is that mobility of a player's arm will also affect torque. The more mobile their shoulder is, for example, the farther away they can bring their arm back, the more potential power that they can create. There are very common errors when performing this movement that will negatively impact torque and angular forces. So one of these would be if an athlete does not open their hips to the setter and then close their hips to the net. This is where most, if not all, torque is lost. We see a lot of younger volleyball players in particular who run directly at the net, leaving no room for them to rotate their body. Another common error is for athletes to allow the ball to get too far back in their swing arc, which makes them contact the ball too early in the arc swing, taking away speed and force. Some of the ways that this can be manipulated to improve technique for performance or prevent injury is using the core for torquing so they can save their shoulders from overuse. We see a lot of rotator cuff injuries and dislocations from girls trying to use only their shoulder when they're swinging at a volleyball and not using the rest of their body. Also, by limiting the angle between the arm and the side of the head, the hand is farther away, thus moving quicker and applying less pressure on the shoulder. This quicker movement allows hitters to swing around the block, but also higher and faster over the block. In our textbook for this class, it stated that a common injury among workers and athletes who engage in forceful overhead movements, typically involving abduction or flexion along the medial rotation, is rotator cuff impingement. Like I said earlier, rotator cuff injuries are very prominent in volleyball players because of their lack of core strength or lack of knowledge of how to use their core. That's another thing that we have to make sure as coaches that we're doing is teaching our players how to use their core in their swing. Applying concepts of power and movement to a cross-court volleyball swing. If we look at lengthening of the muscles in the chest and the anterior shoulder and the contraction of the rear deltoid and scapular muscles, this helps create potential energy for the eventual unloading of the arm. So after the potential energy is created, the arm moves forward, contracting the anterior muscles for the chest and shoulder, pulling the arm alongside the head and through the ball, creating power. The most work happens between the unloading of the core or the closing of the door and flexing of the anterior muscles of the swing and the follow-through. Potential energy happens during the loading phase, and work and kinetic energy happen in the unloading phase of the volleyball swing. Some factors that are involved and must be considered are the length of the arm, because the swing arc is really important in volleyball, and then location of the ball, allowing a player to swing high or forcing them to swing low. So if a set is too high or too low, it can completely change a player's swing, which in turn affects everything else. Mobility of the athlete and their arm. The more mobile an athlete is with their arm, the more successful that they're going to be. Less mobility puts them in huge risk for injuries and being unsuccessful because they can't get to balls that are being placed at them. And then the strength of the muscles. Obviously, the stronger the muscles are, the easier it is going to be for these players to create that work and power. Not loading the arm properly, for example, and not getting the elbow high or the arm next to the head is a huge error that we see all the time in this sport. We also see girls not fully extending the arm above the head or having the arm extended but too far away from the rest of their body. So this means that we see a lot of side arm, which we also see in baseball, is not following through directly but coming all the way out from across the body and going through. And not rotating the core and the arm at the same time, having these work against each other instead of together. Again, another huge issue that we have to always make sure that we're enforcing with athletes to do together. Collision in the volleyball swing occurs when the athlete is unloading their arm and contacting the ball in their swing arc. The hand compresses the ball, redirecting it towards the floor. The compression of the ball transfers kinetic energy from the arm and hand to the ball. Some factors that are involved is the speed of an athlete's unload and the direction and the contact made with the ball are all things that should be considered. When swinging straight through the ball, there is more potential for kinetic energy. When swinging away from the body, hitting a cross-court swing, some of the energy will be lost. It's just part of how that goes. We have to make sure that athletes are hitting at the top of the ball to transfer the most energy possible when they're unloading their arm. Hitting the side of the ball or hitting underneath the ball will cause a loss of energy. Some common errors and things to look for. Hand contact is one of the most common errors when performing this movement that negatively impacts energy in a collision. Players will not completely open their hand or only contact a portion of their hand on the ball, limiting the amount of energy that they can transfer onto the ball. Players who open up their hand as much as possible while simultaneously curving their hand around the ball will create the best contact, allowing them to transfer more energy and direct the ball more accurately. This also allows them to conserve energy and not swing as hard, putting less stress and tension on their shoulders. For example, in the International Sports Med Journal, it talks about the pitching motion in baseball, serving in tennis, spiking in volleyball, passing in football, and launching and javelin throwing can all produce elbow pathology caused by forceful valgus stress, resulting in medial stretching, lateral compression, and posterior impingement, meaning we have to make sure that volleyball players are swinging correctly, especially when they're contacting a ball, because otherwise it is going to create so many problems, not only in the elbow, but in the shoulder and the rest of their body.